what our focus will be today, which is Basil Hayden. And, I'm really excited to be coming to you for so many reasons today. One, because just this early September, we have begun celebrating National Bourbon Heritage Month. And earlier this summer, when Michael and I started talking about reasons to get together, I was like, you know what, if you're cool with it, let's just go ahead and maybe see if we can spread out the entire month of September and show people some things about Basil Hayden and what makes it fun to bring Basil Hayden along for special occasions, whether you're going to a friend's house, and let's face it, we're probably not going much further than maybe to a trusted friend or two's house, and maybe bringing a little Basil Hayden along for the ride with you. It's a perfect bourbon for gifting. It's a perfect bourbon for celebrating with, and not only a bourbon, but also rye. And so all month long, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what starts with Basil Hayden bourbon, that original member of the small batch collection going all the way back to 1992, and then starting to introduce in the next several weeks a few of our innovations and line extensions that have come to the Basil Hayden name over the last 3 years or so. And all of these fantastic bourbons and ryes go really well with cheese. They go really well with light fare and crudité. They play really well with some cocktails that I'd be happy to talk to if anybody has any questions in the chat for Michael or myself. And then, of course, we have some wonderful cheesemakers that are going to be able to share their expertise and insights along with Michael's expertise on some of these cheeses and how well they go with the bourbons and the whiskeys that we'll be trying. So what makes bourbon bourbon? As you might notice, bourbon is a whiskey, and whiskey is loosely defined globally as a grain distillate that spends some time maturing in wood. If you're playing by those rules, you're making whiskey. But contrary to popular belief, bourbon is a very regulated whiskey style. And so we have quite a few different standards of identity that separate us from just that large umbrella definition, So I think maybe we probably have some foodies here, and you would understand that I could tell you that any filet mignon could be a hamburger, but not all hamburger, despite whatever xanthan gums and meat glues you might be using in molecular culinary skills, could never take that just hamburger chuck and turn that into a filet mignon, right? So you can see what I'm saying here. Bourbon is like the filet mignon, right? So all bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon. So easy enough. What makes bourbon so unique is the fact that we are first and foremost American made. You can only make bourbon in the United States. 95% of it's still made in Kentucky because we have that wonderful limestone filtered water. We have access to the breadbasket of the southern Midwest where the corn grows plentifully. We have access to the American oak forests of Missouri and Arkansas, where we have our American white oak, which is what we like to use our barrels, or used to make our barrels. Also, we have a beautiful season spectrum in Kentucky where we have a true Midwestern winter, we have a beautiful southern summer, and then we have that perfect spring and fall in between. Very, very important for aging whiskey the right way. And then also talking about bourbon, we cannot add, American made. And then I talked about our corn and our barrels. And so bourbon has to be made of no less than 51% corn. As we move into rye in the following weeks, you have to be made of no less than 51% rye. And I'll remind you of that if you're going to stick along with us on this journey. And it's a great thing to be able to celebrate our native spirit, because bourbon is truly our native spirit. And it has only been that way since about 1964. Now, might know that we've been making bourbon for a very long time. I said earlier that we've been making bourbon at the Jim B distillery for 225 years this year. But if we only define what bourbon was in 1964, that's because LBJ, who was the president at the time, was a big bourbon drinker. And he saw, tequila recognized the official spirit of Mexico. He saw cognac recognized as the official spirit of France. And he thought to himself, well, darn it, here we are as Americans, we need our own spirit too. And luckily for us, he was a bourbon drinker, and he had noted that throughout our history as a country that we had had notable leaders, politicians, cultural influencers, artists, things like that, drink bourbon. Names like Old Crow, Old Overholt Rye, Old Grandad, things like that were favorites historically throughout our country's history. And so he decided that we would get Congress to agree, if you can believe it or not, Congress agreed that we would claim bourbon as our native spirit in 1964. And so now that we claimed it as ours, we actually had to define it and set the standards of identity. And this was the first time we actually had to do that. And so luckily we call it our ABCs. It's the gospel of bourbon. We all just sing it in a little bit of a different key, talking about distillery to distillery. And we celebrate that during National Bourbon Heritage Month.